I'm Denise Bass, and I'm going to discuss the age of Romanticism. But before we proceed to the lesson, let us know what were the happenings before Romantic period. The king before Romanticism was King Louis XIV. King Louis XIV, also known as Louis the Great or the Sun King, was the monarch of a House of Bourbon who ruled as King of France from 1643 until his death in 1715. The reign of Louis King XIV lasted for 72 years, longer than any other known European sovereign. He established his country as the dominant European power. During the final decades of King Louis XIV, France was weakened by several lengthy wars that drained its resources and the mass exodus of its Protestant population. King Louis XIV died because of gangrene at Versailles. Gangrene is a type of necrosis caused by a critical, insufficient blood supply. So, his 5-year-old grandson succeeded him as Louis XV. So now, let's proceed to the topic. The Romantic period in English literature is taken to begin with the publication of Wordsworth and Coleridge lyrical ballads. This period is a span of time in which literature shared intellectual, linguistic, religious, and artistic influences. William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge published lyrical ballad in 1798. This lyrical ballad is a collection of poems that enlighten people, especially the writers and common people, revolt against the other revolutions and the government. This landmark book was considered to the beginning of English literature in Romantic movement. In contrast to the English language, Wordsworth and Coleridge experimented with the everyday language that could be understood even by the common people. Romantic movement. It was an artistic, literary, musical, and intellectual movement originated in Europe roughly between 1800s to 1850. It was characterized by its emphasis on emotion and individualism, as well as glorification of all the past and nature. It was embodied on visual arts, music, and literature, but had a major impact on historiography, education, and natural science. Romanticism assigned a high value to the achievements of heroic individualists and artists, whose examples it maintained or would raise equality of society. It also promoted individual imagination as a critical authority, allowed the freedom from classical notions of art, and as it is, meaning there was a strong recourse to historical and natural inevitability. It is the dominant set of ideas and beliefs that motivate the actions of the members of the society in a particular time. And the literary movement that is opposite to the Romanticism is the Realism. It is an artistic movement that began in France in the 1850s. It revolted against the exotic subject matter and exaggerated emotionalism drama of the Romantic movement. Instead, it sought to portray real and typical contemporary people and situations with truth and accuracy and not avoiding unpleasant aspects of life. And who are the founders behind the Romanticism movement? So there are two founders. First is William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge are the two founders of Romanticism movement. These two transformed Romanticism into one of the most significant and recognizable movements in all English literature. So let's discuss who is William Wordsworth. He was the most famous Romantic poet. He was born on April 7, 790 until April 23, 1850. He said that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful emotion. Most of his works profoundly felt and expressed the connection of the soul with nature. He saw great value in immediate contact with nature, and his works transitioned from extremely natural experiences to facing realities and ills of life. Next founder is Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He was the most imaginative romantic poet. He was one of the most influential and controversial figures. He was born in the year 1772. He had an addiction to opium and alcohol. He married first Sarah Freaker and loved another who was Sarah Hutchinson. So, how does Romanticism founded? There are 5 revolutions that Romanticism movement began. German strong and down movement and French Revolution is the inspiration of Romanticism movement, while Industrial Revolution, science, rationale of nature, and Age of Enlightenment were the reasons or the reactions on how Romanticism began. German strong and down movement is a reaction to the perceived constraint of rationalism imposed by some aesthetic movements. This period is named for Friedrich Maximilian Klinger's play Strong and Down. The French Revolution overthrew the monarchy, established a republic, and experienced violent periods of political turmoil, and finally culminated in a dictatorship under Napoleon Bonaparte and its principles to Western Europe and beyond. The Industrial Revolution was the biggest historical and economic influence of 19th century culture. It had mass good production of material goods, machines coordinated to meet goods. The energy that time is non-animal sources, and the industry grew 4 times faster. The Age of Enlightenment was marked by an emphasis on scientific method and reductionism along with the increased questioning of religious orthodoxy. Scientific rationalization of nature. It is all about giving priority to the importance of nature. So let's find out what were the happenings or the events that happened during the Romanticism movement. In 1799 was the beginning of French Revolution. The traditional monarchy, who had ruled France for 3 centuries, collapsed in 3 years, giving rise to the French Republic until Napoleon declared himself in 1804. Napoleon Bonaparte was the French military and political leader who rose to prominence during French Revolution and led several successful campaigns during Revolutionary Wars. 1798. Lyrical ballads with few other poems. It is a collection of poems by William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, first published in 1798 and generally considered to have marked the beginning of the English Romantic movement in literature. The immediate effect on critics was modest, but it became and remains a landmark, changing the course of English literary and poetry. Wordsworth and Coleridge set out to overturn what they considered the priggish, learned and highly sculptured forms of 18th century English poetry and bring poetry within the reach of average person by writing the verses using normal everyday language. 1804. Napoleon crowns himself as Emperor of France. In order to fulfill his dreams of conquest in Europe, Napoleon crowned himself as emperor. 1815, allied British, Dutch, and German forces defeat Napoleon at Waterloo. In response to the growing influence and threat of Napoleon, the British, Dutch, and German forces ambushed Napoleon at Waterloo and dealt himself a crushing defeat. 1818, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Considered one of the earliest works of science fiction, Shelley writes about a scientist who creates a life and is scared of what he invented. The novel has romantic and gothic elements. 1821, Concert Stop. This musical play represents emotion and story that are important components of the romantic style of music. 1830, Liberty Leading the People by Eugene Delacroix. This painting was used as a political poster for the revolution during 1830. 1857, Liszt's Faust Symphony. This painting and expression of each character through music is used as the outside influence and the representative of Romantic style. So let us now proceed to the literature and Romantic movement. So the literature during Romantic period is not that far from the meaning of the Romantic movement. They called it as Romantic literature. The literature's Romantic period was all about the criticism of past, emphasis on women and children, isolation of artists and narrators, respect for nature, imagination, and about strong emotion. During the Romantic movement, beside from Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William Wordsworth, we should know other writers in that time. First is John Keats. Besides from William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, we must know some other writers and their most important contribution during Romanticism movement. First is John Keats and his Ode on a Grecian Urn. He said that poetry was full of hope despite of his bleak life. Second is Percy Bysshe Shelley and his Autumn a Dirge. He expelled from Oxford University for a pamphlet on atheism. His first publication was a Gothic novel entitled Zastrozzi, and he died because of the accidental drowning while boating. Next is William Blake and the Tiger. He was the imaginative, original poet, painter, engraver, and mystic during the Romanticism period. The tiger questioned who could make a creature such as the tiger. Next is Lord George Gordon Byron and his She Walks in Beauty. He was the personification of the romantic hero. Friends with Percy and Mary Shelley, his poem was inspired by a woman he met at a party. The Romantic movement or the Romantic period belongs to the modern literary movements. These are movements after the Renaissance. This literary movement was driven by a conscious desire to overturn traditional modes of representation and express the sensibilities of their time, or the people lived that time. They made literature as a weapon to fight for freedom. So, the Romanticism was the most important cultural movement of the 18th century. It was the cultural movement that revolted against the order and intellectual control of the Age of Enlightenment. It is a belief system that got inspiration from examination of inner feelings. The said feelings were superior to reasoning. It was interested in the individual rather than entire society, and it was interested in common people or language.